Don't call me. Altic. So I want to just quick do an oral review of what we learned yesterday, and then we'll continue on. So we learned the Mishnah about a culture lichtoi v'saget afilu cher shoyte v'katan, and the Gemara had a discussion. How is it possible that a cher shoyte v'katan could write a get? Now, if you hold like Rav Meir that Eidich Simakarsi, anybody can write a get. It's a non-issue. But if you want to learn that the Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Lozer, then you have a problem. How could the ksiva be l'shma if it's a cher shoyte v'katan? And Tosfos even had a tat to say that even according to Rav Meir, could be midrabanan, or even though it was a havinet and midaraisa, Rav Meir agrees that you need to ksiva l'shma. So we had several mahalchim in the Gemara as to how to deal with this Mishnah. The first mahalach was gadol oimid al gabav, and we learned that although gadol oimid al gabav works for a cotton, it doesn't work for a goy because a goy has his own independent das. Then we had another shita of Rav Nachman who actually learned that our Mishnah is going according to Rav Meir, and the reason why cher shoyte v'katan, the ksiva of a get, if a cher shoyte v'katan is good, is because ksiva doesn't mean anything. Then the last shita was that it's really going according to Rabbi Lozer, but it's speaking where the cher shoyte v'katan only wrote the toifis and not the toirif. The main part of the get of the ksiva even is the toirif, and therefore, if the toirif was written by a proper adult, we don't care that the cotton, the cher shoyte v'katan, wrote the toifis. Beautiful. Then we got to the next Mishnah of not a question of who could write a get, but who could be a shliach loilocha on a get. Who could bring a shliach? Who could be the shliach? So there, a cher shoyte v'katan cannot be a shliach. A suma can't be a shliach. A b'chavim can't be a shliach. So the Gemara wanted to understand what's wrong with a suma. A suma has das. So if a suma has das, why can't a suma be a shliach? So the Gemara said, and this is very important for today's Gemara, which we actually learned yesterday anyway, that when it says suma, it's talking about maybe get medina sayom, and he has to say b'fani nechtam. A suma cannot say b'fani nechtam because his suma didn't see the chsimas. The Gemara also comes out that based on this, when the Mishnah says that if when he was appointed he was able to see, and then he became blind, and then he was able to see again, that he could bring the get, the Gemara says that that's lav dafka, because even if he's a suma till the very end, as long as at the time of the ksiv and chasimas get he was able to see who wrote it, he could deliver it when he's blind. And the Mishnah that says he has to become healthy again is really referring primarily to the shaita. Then we had a shaila of an eved. Can an eved be a shliach to be mekabel get? And we had a controversy about it. But the first shita was that since our Mishnah is giving a comprehensive list of who cannot be mekabel get, and Ovid Kechavim is listed, and Eved is not listed, we could be medayik from our Tana of our Mishnah that omitted Eved, that in fact an Eved would be able to be mekabel get on behalf of a woman. However, Rabbi Asi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, he had a dissenting opinion, and he said an Eved would not be able to be mekabel get on behalf of a woman from the husband of the woman. Why? Because he's not b'toyres Gittin to kedusha. Rabbi Lozer said being b'toyres something should have no impact on whether or not you can be a shliach for that thing. How do I know this? Because I know a goy could be mafresh trumas and mashris, yet a goy can't be a shliach. And if you're going to tell me whether or not you could do it for yourself is the determining factor as to whether or not you could be a shliach, then why is it that an eved can't be a shliach for truma? Elamaya, it has nothing to do with it. And the reason why a goy cannot be a shliach, the mafresh trumas, is because of a limud that it says by the parsha of truma. It says gam atem. So we learn atem gam atem, which means that you need to have a certain similarity with the Baal himself. And just like the Baal has to be a yid, so too the shliach has to be a yid. But if you dash him that way, then you would also hold that an eved could not be mafresh truma on behalf of a Yisrael through a shlichus. But maybe you don't say like that. Because Rabbi Yannai said the comparison you make from atem gamatem is ma'atem b'nei bris, av shluchachem b'nei bris. A goy is not a b'nei bris, but an eved is a ben bris. So maybe in fact an eved would be able to be a shliach to to be mafish trumas. As far as our shaila of whether or not an eved could be mekabel, could be a shliach leilacha. So the Rebbe Asi Rabbi Yochanan said he cannot, but Rebbe Lazar seems to have a kash on him, which the Gemara seems not to resolve. So I'm not sure if we blind with that. But then Reb Chiba Abba came along and said in the name of Yochanan that Eina Eved Nasser Shliach Lekabel Kedishim Yad Baila Levisha Eini B'Teres Gittin B'Kedusha. So once again, Reb Chiba Abba said that in the name of Yochanan. Now, here he asks a question. Even though a woman who's pregnant could be mekabel a get on behalf of her child, so why, if a woman who's pregnant, a woman who's a shivcha, who's pregnant, she could be a shliach, she could accept a get on behalf of her unborn child. So if she could do that, why can't every eved be mekabel a get shikhr on behalf of another eved? Here, she's being mekabel for a different eved. There's her unborn child. She's being mekabel. Oh, so the Gemara said you don't have a raya from there to our shaila because maybe you say uber yerach imayhu and maybe the halacha is that an adon has a right to free half of his eved. So we look at the uber as just part of her body, and he's freeing part of the body. On that, Tosfos had a kasha. He said it doesn't make a difference if it's part of her body. How does that change anything? The part of her body that's accepting the get is her hand. Her hand is not being freed. So Viter, how could she be kind of with her hand that's not being freed? The only way you could be kind of a get shichrer is because we say Gittin v'yadai boim kachas. He becomes free man as he gets the get. But here the yad is never becoming free. The yad is remaining enslaved. It's only a different part of the body. Dr. Says even if there was no uber here, even if a man gives a get shichrer to a shivcha and he says your whole body, everything should be free except for your hand. That wouldn't work, Pashtus, because your hand still belongs to him. So Tosfos bleib shver on that Gemara. Okay, then we learned the next Gemara is Af Hanoshim she'eina monos loimer meis baila. Even women that are not trusted to say meis baila because they're going to mess her up, they're looking to mess her up. Nevertheless, nemonis will have a gita. If they bring a get, they are nemenis. Which women are actively looking to mess up this married woman? Chamoisa, her mother-in-law. She would love to see her daughter-in-law become usher to her husband, because as far as she's concerned, her son married this wicked witch with a capital B, and she's happy to ruin the marriage. Uma ubas chamoisa, the same thing would be her sister-in-law. The Sarasa meaning if a man is married to two women, one of the wives would want to answer her co-wife to her husband, then she gets them all to herself. The Yevimta. And even if it's her sister-in-law who's married to her husband's brother, assuming that her husband has no children, if her husband's brother is married, she's always worried, the wife of the husband's brother, that what if my brother-in-law dies without children? Now my husband's going to have to do even on that witch that my brother-in-law married. I don't want that, so let me try to mess her up. And Ubas Baila, her stepchild, because he's not happy that her father's diverted his attention to his new wife. So they're all have an interest in messing her up. But if they brought a get, you trust them. Correct the Mishnah, why? Why should you trust them more bringing a get than you trust them to say base? Ma ben get l'nisa. Here you have something in writing here, proving something happened. So let's stop for a brief moment and understand what's happening here. Is this talking about, when she said b'fani nechtam, is this talking about a woman who's bringing it from Chutz La'aretz Eretz Yisrael, or is this speaking in Eretz Yisrael? It's unclear. The Mishnah doesn't say. But let's look at the next case in the Mishnah. The next case in the Mishnah is quite clear what it's talking about. A woman can bring her own get. So clearly, the woman who can bring her own get is saying b'fani nechtam. So clearly, this is speaking when you're bringing it in Medina Sayyam. But the first case in the Mishnah is not. Now, the case before the first case in the Mishnah was what we just learned for yesterday's Gemara, which is talking about a blind person. A blind person cannot bring a get. And we said, why not? Because he cannot say b'fani nechtam. So when the Mishnah before said a blind person can't bring a get, what was it referring to? It was referring to a case of bringing it from Chutz La'aretz Eretz Yisrael. Because otherwise there's no issue of saying b'fani nechtam. In Eretz Yisrael, a blind person can bring a get. Because a blind person could be a shliach. It's only because he cannot say b'fani nechtam u'b'fani nechtam. So kum techois, the last Mishnah is speaking mechutz La'aretz Eretz Yisrael, and the second case in our Mishnah is clearly Mechutz L'Eretz Yisrael. It's the first case in our Mishnah that's not clear, can go both ways, and that's going to be part of the discussion of the Gemara. The Gemara asks the kasha, how could you tell me that we do believe these women to bring a get? But Tanya, we learned the brayso that says fakert. So it's a steer between that brayso and our Mishnah. Rabbi Yosef, it's not a steer at all. They're speaking about two different cases. L'kasha, kan baritz, kan b'chutz laretz. Zokt Rabbi Yosef, he elaborates. Ba'aretz, when we talk about Eretz Yisrael, the lava dibur didaka samchina. We're not relying on these women. The get stands on its own. So we're not relying on the woman, the shliach. So therefore, mehemne, they should be believed, because the whole problem is der namanos. We don't need der namanos in Eretz Yisrael. But the chutz laretz, that the bura didaka samchinan, there they need to have an namanos. They need to say b'fani nechtam, but b'fani nechtam, they don't have an namanos le'lehem. Amalei Abai told his Rebbe, Adarabba, I think the logic should dictate exactly the opposite. Ibcham estaber. Be'aretz, in Eretz Yisrael, the Yosy Baal Ma'ar, since we don't say b'fani nechtam, the very first Mishnah told us that if the Baal comes to be Ma'ar on the get, where no b'fani nechtam was said because it wasn't required, like it was Eretz Yisrael, Yiskayim b'choismav. She needs to bring Edim that can be Makayim to get. And if not, Mashkechinim Bey. We definitely listen to the Baal's ear and we mess up this woman. The Ikal Meimar, Likal Kulaka Machavna. They're like Mehemna. If she brought a get in Eretz Yisrael, and the get is accepted, that could really mess up this woman, because the get's going to be brought. There will be no b'fani nechtam, and should the husband come and be ma'ar, this woman becomes asher l'bayla. That's a real problem. That's where I would say we should not accept their testimony. But the chutz laretz, they can't mess her up even if they try, because in order for the get to be valid, they have to say b'fani nechtam, and therefore she is error-proof. The Yosy Baal ma'ar loy meshkechinim bey. So their man must believe them. You know why? Because when they come and say b'fani nechtam, their das can't beat to mess her up. Because by saying that, they're actually protecting her permanently against any attack of zeal. So therefore, the logic is pungvaker. In Eretz Yisrael, there's an opportunity that through this get they can mess her up. There we got to be concerned. But in Chutz Laretz, or maybe getting in Chutz Laretz Eretz Yisrael, where there's no way they can mess her up with this get, she's foolproof. There, in fact, they would be believed. We have support to Abaye that, in fact, the place where these women are believed is Davka b'chutz laretz, where they have to say b'fani nechtam or b'fani nechtam. Where do we see this? Because this is the brayso. We actually learned in the Mishnah a woman can bring her own get. But how do you know that? What's the makar? Zogt the brayso. Nevertheless, namonish lavigita. Madach women who have less than namonish. Why do they have less namonish? Because they wouldn't be believed to say meis baila. Yet, nevertheless, they still have enough namonish for bringing a get. So clearly, you need less namonish to bring a get than you need to say meis baila. So the woman herself, she is namenish. We will marry her up al piatzma. So she has a much higher level of believability than these other women. So surely she should be namenish to bring her get. Now that the makar of a woman being able to bring her get is from other women that we believe to bring her get, then we need to import more information from the other women. Just like we only believe other women if they bring her get when they say afi, so to her, she's only believed to bring her get if she says so right here you have a klor raya that when are other women believed? When they're saying that's clearly a biased position that they're only believed when they're bringing a get from Chutz Laretz to Eretz Yisrael. But if it was within Eretz Yisrael itself, in fact, these women would not be believed. Once again, that supports the position of Abaye. If you're medaik in the Mishnah itself, it also seems to support the position of Abaye. Why? So you see clearly that it's speaking when you're bringing it midin sayam. I'm still chazering from yesterday, so you didn't miss anything. Shema mina. According to Rabbi Yosef, it's going to be very unusual because Reisha, the Mishnah Batsuma, bringing a get, is clearly only related to B'fani Nechta. Therefore, it must be seeking when you bring it to Chutz La'aretz. The Seifa, the case where Isha Atma Mevi Gita, is also clearly Chutz La'aretz because the Mishnah says black and white. She has to say B'fani Nechta. And Mitziasa, the way Rabbi Yosef learns, speaking in Eretz Yisrael, that's hard to understand. Dr. Rabbi Yosef, it's not so hard to understand. It's perfectly fine in Reisha V'Seifa B'chutz La'aretz and Mitziasa B'Aretz. And I can prove it to you. I'll actually show you how it's miduyak that the center case when other women are in a menace is speaking Eretz Yisrael. Mimai, midikatani. What does the Mishnah ask? The Mishnah wants to know why is it that these women are in a menace to bring a get, even though they're not in a menace to say that the husband died. So how does the Mishnah say? Ma ben get lamisa shaksav moichiach. That's what the Lashon Mishnah says. The ksav is moichiach. What do you mean the ksav is moichiach? Ksav alone is not enough. If it was bringing a get from Chutz La'aretz to Yisrael, they have to be ksav and piv, because they also have to testify b'fani nechtav u'b'fani nechtav. But like I told you, ksav u'peh moichiach. So the fact that the Mishnah says that the primary difference between when they say meis bailach and when they bring a get is the ksiva. Vice the Reis, it's speaking in a case where they don't need to say fani nechtav u'b'fani nechtav. So how does Abai deal with this, Diak? As Rashi Abai understands it perfectly. What's the Gemara asking? What's the Mishnah asking? What's the difference between the women who come and bepeh say that your husband died where their peh is not to be believed, and the women who come to bring a get from Medina Sayyam and they say bepeh b'fani nechtav b'fani nechtav where they all believe? What's the difference between this testimony peh and that testimony peh? The answer is shaksav moichiach, because the b'fani nechtav is accompanied by a ksav as well. So Abaye has a perfect way to understand our Heilige Mishnah. Gewaltig. Now we are up to the new the new sugya to understand how is it work. What does it mean that a woman is neman to bring her own get? Zok the Heilige Gemara. Isha, how is it possible that a woman is a shliach to bring her own get and she has to say b'fani nechtav? Let's look at the Metzias. Who gave her the get? Who gave her the get in Chutz La'aretz? If a woman is a shliach leilacha, who gave her the get in Chutz La'aretz? Anybody? The husband, right? The husband gave her the get, right? So, the moment she got the get from her husband, she's migoreshes. It's a get from Chutz La'aretz to Chutz La'aretz. Right there, she got the get. Why does she have to come there to Shroll and say, she's already migoreshes? Rav Huna, it's speaking in a special case, and the Gemara is going to struggle to find a case that makes sense that the woman is coming to Eretz Yisrael and she has to say, b'fani nechtav or b'fani nechtav. So Rav Huna has the first attempt. You know, the husband gave it to her in Chutz La'aretz, but he said, I don't want this get to be chal until you get to Rab Steinmetz's dayanis, to his bezdin in Yerushalayim on Rechoy Beis Yisrael. So that's why she has to bring it there, and she has to say b'fani nechtav b'fani nechtav. In fact, Gemara, she still wouldn't need to say b'fani nechtav b'fani nechtav because the bezdin has nothing to do with this. It's just a tzayin to get. I don't want the get to be chal until you go there. So kimati hasam igushala. There's nothing that's requiring her to go into Bez and have Bez and do anything. It was just a t'nai that she needs to be there. So once she's there, it's chal. With the Kabbalah that she already was makabel again in Chutz La'aretz. So that doesn't make sense. So Rav Huna had to come with a second trial. Amar Rav Huna bar Manoach mishmei derav acha barei derav ika. The Amar law kimatis hasam. When you get to Eretz Yisrael, you're not calling it yet. Isnechaya ara, put it on the ground, and then you're shliach now, and now go back into your own shoes, v'shakle, and now pick it up, and that's how you're going to get the get. Practically more, that doesn't work anyway. That's like any person. It's not like it is. Basically, he's throwing the get on the floor, and she's taking it by herself. There's no nesina. It's not a good get because it says v'nosan. So that's not an option either. Ella the Amar law, what he must have told her was, have a shliach leilacha ademasas hasam. I want to be memanu you as a shliach leilacha until you get there. When you get there to Yisrael, the chimatis hasam, have a shliach lakabala. Become a shliach lakabala. The kibli is gittin. Interesting idea. So first of all, you need to ask, why does she need to become a shliach lakabala? Why can't she just become herself? Right? She's a shliach l'halacha until she gets to Israel, and that shows she could be herself. Why does she have to be a shliach l'kabbalah? So the Rishash brings down that it's lav dafka. It could just be herself. But how does this work? How does this transaction work? How does she magically? So the Rishash explains that the way this works is the Baal is saying, when you get to Yisrael, I'm terminating your shlichus l'halacha, and now you're going to be able to be a makabel. Since your status changes, it's like internally there was actually a transfer. It's like when you're going online and you're transferring funds from one bank account to another bank account. There's actually a transfer. It would be considered a benosan. The Rishash is the fact that the first shlichus was bottled, and now you're becoming a new person. Internally, it's as if there was actually a transfer. That would count as a benosan. It's a chiddush and lomdus. I can hear Rosh Yeshivas could have a lot of shiurim to say on the lomdus of how this works. And now the Gemara asks a kasha that's going to open us up to a new idea that we never heard of before: rules in shlichus. Because what's interesting about Gittin is very much touches on so many sugyas all around Shas. We learned about Hilchos Ksiva, and now we're learning a lot about Hilchos Shlichus, and these Hilchos Shlichus are not exclusive to get. They're universal. Although that's also a shaila in the Rishonim of some of these things, in fact, are exclusive to get. But let's learn with the pashtas. So look at the Gemara's kasha now. We're at the point in the Gemara where everything seems to make perfect sense. She's a shliach leilach until she gets to Yisrael. Her shlichus is terminated, and now she becomes a makabel. And that's how the transaction works. Correct, Gemara, such a shliach leilach wouldn't work. You know why? Shlichus etzel habal. This seems like Chinese. What does it mean? So let's look at what Tosfos, the very top Tosfos on the Amud, says to explain this kasha, and it's going to open our eyes up to a new rule of shlichus that we never heard of before. Zok Tosfos, shliach loy mikri elo hamishtaleach mizelo zeh sheroyu lachzor l'sholchay loymar asisi shlichusech. This shliach is only a good shliach if he can theoretically, he doesn't have to literally do that, but theoretically, to terminate his shlichus, he has to be able to come back to the Mishaleach and report back to him, I successfully completed your shlichus, koidim sheyasha shliach lechem, before he could take on a new role. There's a new rule. You can't just transition from a shliach leilocha to makabel. You first got to go discharge your shlichus, and if not, you're not a good shliach leilocha. The bomatik chiddush that we never heard of before. What's fascinating about Tosfos is we know Tosfos says afterwards, ubekuntrus like Pirishkein. Rashi doesn't learn like this. So let's look at Rashi, and you tell me what you think if Rashi says this. Zokt Rashi, Zokt Rashi, Shliach le Mikri, Ela HaMishtalech Mizel Hazeh, Sheroyu Lachzer Echel Sholchoi, V'loy Merasiti Shlichuzach Lechavecha. V'zu Ein Rui Lachzer. So you tell me, do you see the nafkamina between Rashi and Tosfos? The answer to that kasha is the next line. You know why Zu Ein Rui Lachzer? Not like Tosfos says, because she took on a new role as a shliach l'kabbalah, and she cannot take on a new role before she has to go discharge the shlichus. Here it's even worse, because by Gittin, who was she sent to by her husband? To herself. Now she's not just a new shliach; she's now in the game. She's now part of the. She's no longer a shliach, a third party. She's no longer an objective third party. She's now in it. So Rashi says it's not a general rule like shlichus that you can't go from one shlichus to the next. You would be able to, but you're transitioning from shlichus to one of the players. That cannot happen. So I never heard of such a solo shlichus because I never got up to that chavdal and gittin. So thank Hakadosh Baruch Hu that Rebbe Shapiro got us to learn full masechtas, because this is our major yisoid in shlichus that we would never have heard of. Did you ever hear of something like this before? Oh, okay, so remember it again. So now it's Chazor Shlichus Eitz Labal. The Gemara that you learned is coming back to you. It's Chazor Shlichus Eitz Labal, not from the Gemara. The Gemara about Shlichus is coming back to the Baal Advarim, to the person who learned it. Right here. So I don't know the lumdus of Shlichus Eitz Labal, but I'll tell you an interesting factoid. I think it's the Vilna Gaon. Somebody says that if you want to know the definition of a word, find the first place in the Torah where that word was used. Where's the first place in the Torah that the word Gershon is used? Yeah. You're reminding me of there was a biblical zoo in Yerushalayim. It used to be by Ezra's Torah. It's not there anymore. And by every animal, they had a pasuk about the animal, like by Perek Shira. And by the camel, it said Ashira Lashem Ki Gomal Aloi. So where's the first place that Gershon is mentioned in Torah? The first place that is mentioned in Torah is when Adam Harishon was kicked out of the Eden. Was he ever going to come back? Even if he would have done tshuva, he would not have come back. Gershon, it means permanently separated. That's what I get it. Permanently separated. The first time you find shliach in the Torah is when Noach sent out the birds. They came back. So you see, shlichus has built in it a return to the sender. So it's like a postal thing, return to sender, right? Return to sender. Well, so shlichus has a boomerang effect as a return to sender. So that's not lumdis, but that's at least telling us the word shlichus means it returns to sender. And stay out permanently. Although you do find places where it doesn't mean that. David Zolti suggested a case where it said Gershon, but he actually did come back. Yes, when Avram Avinu sent away Hagar, she came back, and he told me to use the Lashon Gershon there as well. So, but the point is, what happened was first I said it over, because that's what Gershon means in the Torah. And then David asked, and then I remembered that what I heard was the first time it's mentioned in the Torah. That's what defines what its true meaning is. Okay, so now we're back to square one. How does this work? That the get's only going to work when she gets back to Yisrael. Zakta Gemara, the Amr law, have a shliach leilacha adamotas hasam. You should be a shliach leilacha until you get to Yisrael, and then don't become a makabel. V'chimotas hasam shavya shliach lekabala. Find somebody else to make into a shliach lekabala, and then give it to somebody else. So now you're never taking on a new role. You become a shliach leilacha. That's the only role you have. Therefore, it'll be chazor shlichas eitzel habal. I'm sorry. Well, why he's doing this? Yeah, I hear. I don't think he loves her anymore. Zok Gemara, Hanicha. He's waiting for her to say, "How about if I'm moichel ksuba? Would you just give me the damn get?" And he'll say, "Ah, that's what I was waiting for." But he said, "No, I want to give you ksuba. I want to give you the paper that's to get on. I want you to be kabel that as ksuba, like as if it's gold." Okay, Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. So we're going to try now another attempt. So another attempt is that you remain a shliach leilacha, and you're going to get somebody else to become a shliach lekabala, which means your role never terminates. There's a machlokes. Is a woman allowed to make a shliach lekabala? Now, surely she can make a shliach lekabala if the husband is giving the get directly to the shliach lekabala. But what if the husband is sending it with a shliach leilacha? Can a woman there make a shliach lekabala? Why not? So the Gemara is going to discuss it now. Because then she is the shliach baila, she's the shliach leilacha, and she's appointing a shliach lekabala, and that works fine and dandy. According to the man who holds that if the baal is sending a get with a shliach leilacha, you cannot use a shliach lekabala. Michael Maimer, why did this won't work? Zok Gemara, it still will work. You know why? Time am I. You know the reason why you're not allowed to make a shliach lekabala if your husband is sending you a get with a shliach leilacha? It's because of the ikabizay in the baal. You know, your people will talk to my people, right? Your shliach will talk to my shliach. The baal, what a chutzpah. You don't want to take the get from me? A chutzpah nahazah. So I made a shliach leilacha. You don't want to come and take the get from the shliach leilacha? What do you want to me? It doesn't pass for you to come to take the get from the shliach leilacha. You know what? I'm mevatel the shliach leilacha. I only made him a shliach leilacha almanas, and he's going to give you the get straight. If you're going to only appoint the shliach, then I'm mevatel the shliach leilacha. So it'll mess up the whole get. If that's the reason why, right? So that explains perfectly why if the baal gives it directly to a shliach lekabala, it'll work. Because the fact that he gave it shows obviously that he's not makbid. So the default is you'll assume he's makbid. But if you see he himself handed it over to the shliach lekabala, clearly he's not makbid. So here also, what happened over here? The baal told her, "You be the shliach leilacha," and when you get there to Yisrael, get a hold of a shliach l'kabbalah. So if the Baal is specifically instructing you to do that, surely there's no problem over here. Zok Gemara, time should be the Baal, because he's actually instructing you to do that. Correct Gemara, that makes sense if the reason why you cannot appoint a shliach l'kabbalah to accept the get from a shliach l'locha if it's because of the zayin. But there's another svara as to why we don't allow a shliach l'kabbalah to accept from a shliach l'locha. So what is the chatzera habal achamikan? We had it recently. If you remember, we had a mishnah that told us a chiddush in halacha that you can give a get to your eved, and then you can give the eved to the woman, and that's how she's going to get. And we also learned that you can give a get, you can put a get into your chutzner, and you can be maked a chutzner to the woman, and it'll work as well. And the Gemara asked, why do I need, if I know about eved already, why do I need to tell you the halacha by a chutzner? It's the same thing. The Gemara said you would have thought that by a chutzner it wouldn't work. Gzeira otu chutzner habal achamikan. What does that mean? That means, what if I don't put the get into my own chutzner, and then I'm maked a chutzner to my wife? What if I put the get into my friend's chutzner, and then my friend gives his chutzner to the wife? So there she'll be kind of the get, but she's not getting it from me, and therefore that doesn't work. So maybe the reason why we don't let a shliach l'kabbalah accept from a shliach l'locha is because that's a little bit of indirect, and people will confuse that and also allow a chatzer habal achamikan. So therefore, that's why it's not allowed. If that's why it's not allowed, then it wouldn't be allowed here either because it's structural. The Baal can't be moichel on that. So ma'ikal meimar, once again, we're stuck. What is the case where the get is only chal here in Eretz Yisrael, where she has to say b'fani nechtam, if there's no case where that would be relevant? So let's see how Rashi explains the comparison to chatzer habal achamikan. So Rashi, the damyan lahadadi, they actually are similar to each other. Shecheshazarach get I'm sorry. Keshezara get lachatzer chaveiroi. V'achakach kansa hi achatzer. Harehu oites achatzer shliach lohoilach. What he's essentially doing is he's making the chatzer of his friend a shliach to deliver the get to his wife. V'hish keshekanasoi asasoi shliach l'kabbalah. And when she buys the field, she's making the field into a shliach l'kabbalah. So now you see the comparison to a shliach lohilacha giving the get over to a shliach l'kabbalah. And therefore, if we allow a shliach l'kabbalah to give the get to a shliach l'kabbalah, then we're also going to allow to transfer the get from his ownership to her ownership through someone else's chutzner. So why taka doesn't work? Because the chutzner lav mishum shlichus is rabbi. The reason why chutzner doesn't work is not because it's a shliach. If it was a shliach, maybe it would work. Ela mishum yoda. It's because of yad. He shited in the sina lav yadahu. The problem is when he put the get into the chutzner was not the yad of the isha yet, because the chutzner didn't belong to the isha yet. That's why it doesn't work. So now we're back to square one. We've tried, I think, 4 attempts at explaining how do you have a woman that gets a get from her husband and comes to Eretz Yisrael. Why isn't she migureshes right away? Zok the Gemara. Now the Gemara has 2 options that the Gemara is going to remain with. Zok the Gemara, the Amar law have a shliach lahilacha ad matasasam. I'm making you a shliach lahilacha until you get there. V'chimatasasam, and when you get there, shavi shliach lahilacha, pass it on to another shliach lahilacha, and then you fulfilled your shliach completely. Now it's in the hands of a different shliach. Then you can now become the woman to be mekabel, because there's no problem of chazor shliach that's labal, because your shliach is terminated properly, and then the kibbutz is kidach minei. So where does she say b'fani nechtav b'fani nechtam if she's not giving the get over? Zokt Rashi, this is the mechanics of how it works. Shavi shliach achrina leilacha, kidei shetei shlichusa chezer eitzel labal, v'la'achar zman, and then later on kibbutz kidach minei be mekabel the get from the second shliach leilacha that you passed it on to. Ushliach she'asa shliach amrin b'chol get. If a shliach wants to appoint another shliach, it has to be done in Bezdin. Shliach harishin oisas hasheni bebezdin. It has to be done in Bezdin. And when he's doing the transfer in Bezdin, so instead of saying by the transferring of the get to the Isha, the would be said by the transferring of the get from Shliach Leilacha 1 to Shliach Leilacha 2. The Boisema is really a small variation to the same idea. The Amr Law have a Shliach Leilacha at the Batas Hasam until you get there. When you get there to Yisrael, Omar Kame Beidina, go declare in front of a bezin, and leave them to get. Umashri Beidina shliach, and that will make the bezin into a shliach. V'lesvua and the halach, and they'll give it. So basically, it's the same thing. You're terminating your shliach lohilacha and not directly transitioning into the makabel. There's another step in between. There's another shliach lohilacha taking over. So we have a mishnah that says something so broad. It's a very small case where you had a wacko husband who made some weird type of t'nai. You take this get, take this roll, and Yisrael, give it to a different shliach and bezin, and then you get a bet. Then she could say b'fani nechtav, b'fani nechtav. You don't have to physically go back. The main point is you can't transition into another role. You have to come shliach, so that technically you would be able to go and report back. But if you transition directly into another role, then you can't do it. So I don't think there's ever a havmi that the shliach has to actually physically go back. It just when he terminates the shlichus, he cannot transition directly into a different role. And Rashi says you could transition into a different role. You can't transition into one of the players. Okay, so Baruch Hashem, we were zoicha to finish the second parak. We had two amevi gets. B'li neder, how do naloch amevi get? How do naloch amevi get? How do naloch amevi get? Now on to the third parak. I need to listen carefully here because I prepared this at 3:30 in the morning when I was exhausted because I had a service call last night. So I was out from 12 to 4. Actually, I got back at 4. So at 4 o'clock in the morning, I prepared this. So I need to listen carefully to make sure I don't make any stupid mistakes. I'm sorry? No, I'm better than so. I'm told doesn't get paid. Kol get shenechtav shaloi l'shum isha. If you have a get that wasn't written for any isha at all, puzzle, it's puzzle. What's an example of a get that wasn't written l'shem isha? Ketzat hayover b'shuk. He was walking down the street. V'shama koil soifrim, and he heard soifrim were training their understudies, and they said, "Write azam in star." Makrin, v'shama kol soifrim makrin. So the instructor was telling his students, "Write such a get for practice." Ish ploini, megarsh ploinis, mimakam ploini. And he said, "Wow, v'zeshmi, v'zeshemishti." Punkt, the example that this instructor pulled out of his head arbitrarily matches my profile perfectly. So I want this get. I know my wife burnt the cholent last week. I want that get. I'm getting rid of her. This is a sign from heaven that I have to divorce my wife. Right? I'm walking down the street. I'm angry at her burning the cholent, and boom! I hear this. Come on. If there's not a sign, if that's not a sign from heaven, what else is? So the halach is pasal l'garish boy. It's not a sign from heaven at all. It's a pasal get. It wouldn't work. Yes or miken. I'll tell you even a bigger thing. Kazav l'garish ishtay. What if he wrote a get l'shma to his wife, to Megarsh's wife, v'nimlach? And what happened was next week the cholent was mamish kabalti. So he said, you know what? I don't want to divorce her because maybe she could make a good cholent. Maybe that was a one-off. And then Matzaban Irai, his friend called him and said, it cost $400 or $500 to write a get. I see you have a get. My wife burnt the cholent 2 weeks in a row. I'm done. So and he told his friend, listen, Shemika Shimcha, let me take your star off you. It's useless to you. Let me use it. The halach is pasal l'garish boy. So we're going to have to see why is this a bigger chiddush. The Gemara is going to explain why it's a bigger chiddush. Before we turn over, I just want to look at Tosfos a little bit to see if we can nash a little bit. Yes, we can. Kasav l'garish hashishtay. The Gemara mefarish. The Gemara explains loy zeh shenichtav to loy l'shem gerushin. The first case, the get wasn't even written l'shem gerushin. It's just written for a practice for the sofer. Ela'af zeh shenichtav l'shem gerushin. In the second case, it was actually written as a real get. It just was the wrong woman. Lahaki tana yesamiken. So the Gemara is saying yesamiken means why is the second case a bigger chiddush? Because in the second case, at least it was written to be a get. It might have been written for the wrong woman, but at least it was written to be a get. How could we say this is a bigger chiddush? Even the Mahai Nami lohava shmeinon b'kamaisa. This you don't hear from the first. You know why? The puzzle that is puzzle. The havamina, the haihu, the chi'ichtiv l'shem rachel, loyhadu ichtiv l'shem leah. Maybe say adrabah. maybe the second case is a lesser chiddush. You know why? Because you made it beferish for the wrong woman. So that's worse. Aval soifrim, the Islam that's like a stam. It's blank. So maybe that's better. Maybe it's better because it wasn't designated for one woman. It was written generically. So maybe now I can apply it to one of the women. Aval soifrim, the Islam hakanami de kosher. The haki amrinim prepare karma de erevin. The avagav den the gilos of sheir lashkas b'soita acheres. We learned this by soita. If you write a parsha of soita for one woman, you cannot use it for another woman. But Torah, remember we had a shaila if you can use the parsha of soita that's written in Torah. The Gemara said maybe Torah would be better than using one woman's soita, parsha of soita for the other, because avagav this lama devida hachanami de moichid. Maybe Torah is better. You know why? Because it was made generic. Yeshloim is aktosis the lislami de hacha loy chashav lishma kamoy lislami de sefer Torah. There in Soita and in Erevin, where the Gemara said the fact that it was written stam in the sefer Torah lislami that you could use for a Soita, that's much better than in our case where the training session of the Shtaris wrote a generic get. Why? The soifrim ha'asuyim lislamed, soifrim who are practicing to write, ain't koisvin kalal l'shem hechsher to get. They're not having any kavanah whatsoever, any type of hechsher beget. It's like doodling. Aval sefer Torah koisev v'stam l'chol ma'ashetorach lasses by. A sefer Torah could have a generic kavanah. I'm writing sefer Torah for whatever I'll need it for. It's not a specific purpose that you're writing a Torah for. It's general purpose, whatever you need it for to learn to do. But when they're writing a get to practice, then that's considered like a positive kavanah. You're writing to practice, not to be a get. But I just wanted to bring out that thought. We're building chedushim, so now we're going to go into a bigger chedush. In the last case was Reuben made it for his wife Leah, and this other Reuben cannot use it for his wife Leah. Well, how about if he himself had two wives? He had two wives. They both were named Rivki. Are you allowed to marry two women with the same name? I don't even know. But he married two women whose name was Rivki. And very good. And then he found out that there was a cherem negation. So he's stuck now. He has to divorce one. He doesn't know which one to divorce. So he decided, I'm going to divorce the older one. Now, why should I stay married to the old fat one if I could be married to the young pretty one? So because of Lagarish Hagdoila, he wrote a get and he had in mind to divorce the big Rivki. Lo Yagarish Boys Aktana, he's not allowed to use that. He can't change his mind later. Say, she's such an immature baby, I'd rather get rid of her. It doesn't work because it was made for the other one. Right? But it's still better than the last case where at least now it's for his wives, right? Yes, I'll tell you even a greater chiddush. Amal Lavler, listen, I have to get rid of one of my two wives. I haven't yet decided which one it is. But if I have a get, I know they'll both be very nice to me. Well, I have the get. So you write it for Rivki, and I'll already decide which Rivki I want to apply to. It's possible. This actually involves a whole new sugya. Again, Gittin leads us in. It's a gateway to every sugya in Shas. So let's look at the problem with the last one. The last one is Lishma, but it's basically it's a Tanai. Why can you make it Tanai? It's Lishma, Lashem, the woman that I pick later. Why not? Tanai. So Zok Taisvis, Zok Rashi, I mean, La'ezish Eretz Agarish, Postal Agarish, boy. The Ein Breira, because it's Breira. The Lo Yamrinan, Huver Hadavar, the Mishas Ksiva, Hayadaita Lazu, very Nechta Lishma. If you held a Breira, you could say that later on will reveal to us what my kavanah was back there. Even though I'm not consciously thinking that, but if you use Breira, it would define this get retroactively as having been written for that lady. So now this last case in the Mishnah opens us up to a whole new sugya. Tosfos asks a very good kasha. The Gemara refers to the Ein Breira, like Rashi said, Ein Breira. Even if you would normally hold Yesh Breira, even if you hold Yesh Breira, that could be in any other parts of the Torah. But in every part of the Torah, it doesn't say the Chas of law. Here you have a special halacha of Lishma, which is essentially exactly what Moshe Stern said when we learned the Mishnah. It's not Lishma. How could you say that Breira will make it Lishma? It's not Lishma. It's felt in the Chas of law. The Gemara Itmar Baha Kamar Rabbi Yochanan named Breira Shum Devina Lo Lishma. So you see that concept in the Gemara as well. Mashma Abagav de Baalma Yesh Breira Hacha Pasal Midichshiv V'Chasav Lo. So basically, Tosfos is saying I disagree with Rashi. Rashi is saying it's totally in the Shaila of Breira or Ein Breira. Tosfos, everybody should hold over here Ein Breira. What do we pass on by Breira? You know what the halacha is by Breira? By Milsa Deraisa we pass on Ein Breira. By Milsa Derabban we pass on Yesh Breira. However, that's not really what we pass on. It's by Milsa Deraisa you go to Chumra, and by Milsa Derabban you go to Kula. Normally, saying Yesh Breira is a Kula. But if there was a case where saying Yesh Breira would be a Chumra, then by a Derabbanan you would say Ein Breira. Zok the Gemara weiter. Kasav Lagar says Ishtoi V'Nimlach. He wrote a get to divorce his wife, and then he changed his mind. This was, I believe, the second case of the Mishnah, right? Was it the second case of the Mishnah? Yeah, that's the second case of the Mishnah. Yeah, this is the second case of the Mishnah. Okay? Zokt, but it's a v'chulu. Correct Gemara, the Ella Reisha b'mai. Dr. Rashi, Ella Reisha, the Tani, Ish Ploini, Girish Ploinis b'mai. Ilav Hochi, the Oyster Ploini, Kosav Lagaris, Ashishte Benimlach. So we have to do a little bit of a rewind, because unfortunately, I mistakenly touched the Mishnah like the Maskana of the Gemara. And I touched it that it was a teacher just dictating some theoretical get just to teach them. But the pashas of the rice of the Mishnah, when you read it, Kol Get Shenichlas Play Shamisha, Keta the Over Bishuk V'Shama Kol Sefer Makon Ish Pliny V'Gash Plynus, Mimakon Pliny. At this point in the Gemara thought that the instruction was to write a get for somebody with this specific name. So it was being written L'Shem Get. So if that's the case, then it's really exactly the same case as the second case. What's the difference if they were writing it L'Shem some other guy, or in the case where one guy instructed them to make it, and he's giving it to somebody else? It's really the identical case. They're writing it for one Ruvain, and another Ruvain wants to use it. And this is how I touched at the beginning. We're not speaking about Soifrim who are actually a Soifer who's actually writing a get on behalf of somebody else. This is Soifrim who are not writing a get on behalf of anybody. They're just practicing. So the teacher is coming up with a make-up name. Again, that Chiddush is now being told to us. That wasn't the Pashup shot of the Mishnah. I apologize that I was biased because I already knew the Gemara, so I touched the Mishnah that way. Omer Abashi, Dekanami. It actually makes sense to say that that's the case in the Mishnah where they were doing an exercise. They weren't even writing it l'shem anybody's get. The Katani, Soifrin, Makrin, V'loi Katani, Soifrin, Kairin. What is the difference between Makrin and Kairin? Shmamina. Zokt Rashi. Lislamed Lichtov Gittin. They were just practicing how to write a get. Makrin, which means the word Makrin means that Hagadolim Makrin L'Talmidein. It means the seniors, the teachers, are telling the Talmidim kach v'kach. They're dictating this and that, and they're saying kishiyave get lefanecha. If you ever have an opportunity where you need to write a get, kasvu, this is how you should write it. And as an example, the iskiru shem inish balma, they made it up. Alma b'talmidim maskinim, because the word makrin generally is used when someone is teaching somebody else. If they were actually reading what they were writing and they were actually writing it for a get for somebody else, it would have said, well, you Soifrin Kairin. They were reading as they were writing, but they weren't reading it as they were writing. They were dictating. So makrin means to dictate. That's what the Mishnah says. Soifrin Kairin Shmamino. Zok Gemara weiter. My yesem came. Clearly, we're building up Chedushim. Let's clarify each step of the way. Why is the second case a bigger Chedush than the first case, the third over the second, and the fourth over the third? Never mind the first case of the Mishnah, where the get is stam being written for practice, not for any gershon at all. Ela l'slamed, as Rashi says, but even a get that was written l'shem gershon, but it was written for a different Reuben and a different Rivka, that's also going to be possible. So Rashi ela avzeh shenichtav l'shem gershon gemurin v'nimlach is possible. And now let's build to the third step. Not only if the get wasn't written for his get, but just for the wrong woman, possible will also be possible. Zok Rashi, Veloiza Bavat Shenichlam Shloshem Gershon Shal Adam Zeh Pasul, La'av Zeh Doilo Shtei Noshim Shenichtav L'Shem Gershon Dahai Gavra Pasul, Hoil V'Nichtav Shaloshem Gershon Shal Zu. It's not specific on the woman who the get is intended for. And now for the fourth and last chiddush, Veloiza Shaloi Nichtav L'Shem Gershon Ha. Never mind if the get wasn't written for this woman, because it was specifically written for his other wife, right? It was written for the Gedolah. This one technically could have been, it was he made it and he was going to leave it to decide. So it's possible that this get was actually written for this specific woman who he wanted to give it to. Possible, it's possible. Why? Not it's either the extra svar of l'shmuel, like Moise said, like Tosfos says, or it's because Abraham. Zok the Gemara, my timer. What in fact is the reason why the last case does not work? Zok the Gemara. I kasav v'nasan sefer krisus biyada. So let me see Rashi. V'sefer my kamash v'not. That's right over here. Where am I up to? Okay, so let's see what we do. My time. I kasav v'nasan sefer krisus biyada. If it just says the kasav v'nasan sefer krisus biyada, havamina, I would have thought lemute heich kama. I would have thought that these words in the pasuk are only mamai, the first case, the loy obed l'shum krisus. It wasn't written for a get at all. It was just written lehislamet. Aval kasav legarish es ishtoi. But what if in fact this get was originally written to be Megarish's wife? So the get itself was written to actually be a real get. The nimlach, and he changed his mind. The obed l'shum krisus. It was made l'shum krisus. Ema kosher. Maybe it would be kosher. Kasav rachmana. The pasuk tells you. Vichasav. So what does it say over here? It says Vichasav, and we learned from the Vichasav that it has to be written l'shem, the proper man for him. Vichasav havamita hai delayu kakasavla. I would have thought. If it was Mechazav, I would have thought Lemute Hai the Loy Iu Kakasavla, because it's not written for this Ruvain, it was written for the wrong Ruvain. But if he has two wives with the same name, the Iu Kakasavla, that the get was at least written for the right man, Ema Kasher, maybe it would be Kasher, even though it wasn't written for the right woman. Kazer Echmana law, the Chasav law, Lishma. It's not enough to have a Chasav for him. It has to be law. It has to be also written lishma for the woman. The Sefer Lamali. Why don't you say the Rashi? We say the my kamash malon hashminin kvar de gershon de David ina. So what do I learn from the last case? The last case I learned kamash malon the ein breira. I learned ein breira the Rashi. The loy tema hover de b'shas ksiva nami daite aha. Don't say that through breira we can actually say in fact that at ksivas a get it was determined who this get would be, both for the husband and for which wife. And therefore, for Ikal Gershon, the day, Kamash Malon, that there's no Breira. Gewaltig. Zog the Gemara weiter. Kosav Lagarish or Sagdoila, Lo Yagarish Boy Isaktan. He cannot use it for a different wife, even though she has the same name. Zog the Gemara. Ketana Hudalay Matzim Megarish Bay. He cannot use this for the Ketana. Hagadoila Matzim Megarish Bay. Are you telling me that he's allowed to use this get for the woman who he intended to give it to? The problem is, in the get Menei Obey, it's not clearly defined which wife it's for. Because just saying Rivka doesn't count, because there's two Rivkas here. So the get is not clearly defined. Amar Rabba, Zoy Semeris. You know what this teaches you? You know what this teaches you? So let's see Rashi. When she pulls out the get to prove that she's a free woman, we're not going to say, hey, you can't get married with this get. We're not so sure who said this get was written for you. Maybe really your other wife, the other wife was Megureshes, and you're still a Neshish. Well, how did you get this get in your hands? Your co-wife lost the get. You want out of this marriage. So you kept it, and you're claiming it's your get, but maybe you didn't. Maybe it's not your get. Rather, from our mission, you have a raya that if she's holding on to a get, you're not choshed that she stole it from her sister, from from her co-wife. You'll say she got this get. Amar Rabba Zoyse Meres. Once again, we're applying what we're learning in Gerushin to regular stories. If there's two people in a city, and both of their names are Yosef and Shimon, and they want to bring a star to say that Chaim Yankel owes them money. So there's two Yosef and Shimon in one city, and one of them has a star that says Chaim Yankel owes Yosef and Shimon money. Because think about it, Chaim Yankel will say, you have a star that says I owe Yosef and Shimon money? Yeah, but I don't owe it to you, I owe it to another guy. We don't say that he could say that. Rather, this Yosef and Shimon could say, yes, there's another Yosef and Shimon, but there's a huge difference between this Yosef and Shimon and that Yosef and Shimon. I have the star in my hands. So you see from the fact that we believe the woman is holding the get to say that it was her get, so too we will believe a Yosef ben Shimon who's holding the star that he is the Yosef ben Shimon who is owed the money. One of these Yosef ben Shimons who went to Yaakov and said, you owe me money, the loiva can't say, I don't have to pay you because I never borrowed money from you. You have a star? That's not your star. He probably lost the star and you chapped it from him. I don't owe you a penny. I have nothing to do with you. I'm not giving you a penny. Rather, you say, the high toughest lishtara gabibe. Since this Yosef ben Shimon is holding the star, we're going to assume that it's legally his. And that's exactly what we're doing with this woman. Amalei Abaye, Dr. Abaye, if that's the case, in the first case of the Mishnah, the Katani Shmi Kishimcha, Tosal Lagarish Boy. So, Frank the Gemara, Sheni Hu Deloimotzim Lagarish Boy. The Mishnah is saying only the other fellow, who it was not written for him, he can't use it for a get. Harisha in Matzi Megarish Boy. Are you telling me that the first guy who it was written for him, even though it's not defined which couple it was written for, because they have the same coordinates, are you saying he could use it as a get? But we did say, if there's two Yosef and Shimons, and one of them owe money to Beryl, and Beryl comes with his star to Yosef and Shimon, and he says, Yosef and Shimon, I have a star that says you owe me money. Yosef and Shimon say, sorry, pal, I'm not the Yosef and Shimon who owes you money, it's the other Yosef and Shimon who owes you money. So if I'm money with the star, the fact that I hold on to the star is proof that I'm the one who's owed the money. But on the flip side, where Chaim Yankel is holding the star, and he wants to collect from Yosef and Shimon, there, how could you prove that I'm the Yosef and Shimon in the star? I'm not connected in any way to that star. Maybe it's the other guy. Oy bezoi, let's have a look at the similar case by Gerushin. By Gerushin, let's see Rashi. So you have two men who have the same name, and their wives as well share the same name. Heidik Nami, are you going to make the same diet? Harishon shenichtav l'shmoi megarish bei, v'chimavkalei, and when the woman pulls the get to show that she's a free woman, lo yamrinon, we don't say mishum chumer deisha shish, shema loy bayla shizu kasvay ala acher. When this woman comes to Bezin with her get that says she got it from her husband Reuben, Bezin will say, how do we know this is your get? Maybe in fact this get was given from a different husband to a different wife. Zok to Gemara, Harminon b'mesnisen, the get pashat b'bava basra, Shnei Yosef and Shimon, shayu b'irachas, ein yechoyin lot ishtar chayiv zelzeh. They cannot pull a shtar chayiv one on the other, because everyone will say, I'm the malva, right? V'lo echad yachal alei ishtar chayiv, the Amar lei, each one will say, Loy ani lovisi mimcha, I'm not a loiva, elechaveir love mimcha. And umaser lechashtar, he gave me the star. But I didn't give you the star, he gave me the star. Even though whether or not they could mon is actually a shaila, and we're not choshed lefila, but moidu, everybody agrees, they nacherim matzin alayim. Everybody agrees that you can't collect from me with a star that says Yosef and Shimon owes you money, because who said I'm the Yosef and Shimon? Here too by get, you should say the same thing. Let the Bezin say, you got a get, it says you got it from Reuben. How do I know you got it from your husband Reuben? Maybe you got it from the other guy Reuben. Maybe he wrote it. And he changed his mind and he threw it out midas because he didn't want to use it anymore. This woman found it. She wanted to get out of her marriage. She found the get written. She took it and she claimed it from her husband. But who said it's from her husband? Yeah, you could prove it. She might be able to prove that she's holding it. We say it's her get. But how could she prove which husband it was from? So how, in fact, would that case work if you're comparing it to a shtarchoy? So you have to say, you know why she's believed when she has the get? Because she had Adim that were there when her husband Reuben gave her the get. Rabbi Lazarhi. So if that's the case, you can explain it away the same way when the get was written to one of his two wives, that they're Adim Masira. So therefore, you don't have any type of raya to a dinam ominous as to whether or not they would be able to collect with it. Look, Rashi, Rabbi Lazar. Let's see Rashi. The Adim Masira, Shemakir Neshneim, they recognize the husband and the wife, and the other husband and other wife, so they know exactly who's who. They know for sure it was this Reuven who gave it to this Rivka. But if she just had a get that was signed, that would not free her, because we can't be so sure that this was her get and it was written by her husband. Like we said, and then he never gave it to his wife, and he gave it over to his friend to use, and therefore she would not be believed if she showed a get. So too, in the first case, you could say it's speaking Beit Masira, and therefore there is no chashash that Reuben divorced the other Rivka, because there's Edim Masira that says which Rivka got the get. But maybe if they only had Edim Chsima, maybe in fact she's not the one who's divorced. Maybe it's her friend, and her co-wife maybe dropped it and she grabbed it, and now she's claiming that she got it. And therefore, maybe by shtar choiv they wouldn't be able to be moish shtar choiv alakayim because you're choshes minufila. So from our Mishnah, you don't have a raya because our Mishnah might be speaking with Edim Masira. If we knew for sure our Mishnah was speaking with Edim Chsima, then you'd have a good raya. But we don't know for a fact that our Mishnah is speaking with Edim Chsima. Maybe it's Edim Masira, according to Rabbi Lazar, where there's no question here because you have Edim testifying which man gave the get to which woman. Okay, we'll stop here. Baruch Hashem, we finished Daf Chav Daled. I'm very pleased. Chav Daled is the Matnas Kuna. The Matnas Kuna is Chav Daled Matnas Kuna. It's funny that Daf Chav Daled is Matnas Kuna, and if someone's a grusha, you can't marry her. Teshkoyach, everybody.